My personal engagement with the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust began 19 years ago, in 1998, and has more or less been twofold ever since. That is to say, from the beginning of my devotional service, I've been involved in the BBT as Srila Prabhupada's Dutch translator, but over the years, my involvement in BBT production management has increased. It even expanded in 2011 and 2012, for I joined the African BBT as production manager shortly after the publication of our first book, The Zulu Beyond Birth and Death. I actually consider my dual engagement in the BBT as translator and production manager to be an advantage, because both roles keep me closely in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books in their own ways. As translator, I zoom in on word meanings and overall message. As production manager, I zoom out to ensure that all our books get printed in all African languages. Still, since I have a special affinity for translation, I'd like to say a few words about this crucial task in publishing Prabhupada's books before I address book production and show you what BBT Africa has accomplished thus far and is working on right now. Now it may look like translation is just one of many tasks that fill up the production chart, but this is misleading, because actually translation is the most important task in the entire production line. Why? Because the translators are the medium between Srila Prabhupada and the reader. So how our translators translate Prabhupada's words is of critical importance to the spreading of our Krishna consciousness movement. And I have asked myself, what does an ideal translation look like? So far, I've encountered these three main criteria. Generally, I think we could say that these three criteria, that a translation be accurate, natural and communicative, make for a balanced approach in which meaning is accurately reproduced in a natural language that speaks to the reader. Of course, a translator is expected to have a good understanding of how both languages work, but he or she should also find and use the best words, sentence structures, and rhetorical devices to express the message of the original text in a way that sounds natural to foreign readers. The basic requirements I mentioned just now have been better formulated in these rules of thumb. They were written down some 5 centuries ago, but haven't at all lost their relevance. This historical list still instructs translators to overcome gaps in their understanding of the languages they work with and improve their skills to perfect their translations. But such criteria of an ideal translation can be further refined, and this has been done by a group of Bible translators, and they came up with 4 criteria. These Bible translators wanted to be faithful to the original biblical texts, but not at the expense of beautiful language. They wanted beauty, but not at the expense of clarity. They wanted clarity, but not at the expense of dignified expression. They wanted all these 4 criteria in balance. Of course, in the BBT our focus is on Srila Prabhupada's books, and the BBT's preference is to have devotee translators who understand and practice the Krishna conscious philosophy and purpose. Our translators and those who edit their translations should always ask themselves whether their translations carry the same mood as Prabhupada, are faithful to his words, and use the target language in the right way. To better translate our sacred texts, however, it seems that more is required from translators besides guarding their language skills. They may also want to pay attention to what could be called translation ethics. This means that apart from paying attention to what they do, they should also be mindful of who they are, because to understand and then translate the sacred, one needs to be sacred, or at least move towards the sacred. And this slide shows some items to consider while moving towards the sacred and which, it seems to me, will help a translator of sacred texts better transmit the message of the sacred. As it happens, in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna has given us excellent guidelines for translating properly. The austerities of speech mentioned here are also applicable to translations. So based on Krishna's criteria of proper language and speech, we also arrive at criteria for good or ideal translations. That is to say, translations should be truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and should be as good as the sacred literature they are meant to represent. It's interesting that the balanced approach to Bible translation I mentioned before can, perhaps surprisingly, be brought into close harmony with what Sri Krishna says here in Bhagavad Gita. I think you'll agree that the criteria match rather closely. So in the BBT, we're also after accuracy, beauty, clarity, and dignity in our publications, and for that we need translators who are both linguistically and devotionally qualified. And of course, who else but the BBT's original translator, Srila Prabhupada, would be an ideal translator to follow for a BBT devotee. Srila Prabhupada sat down in the early hours to translate volume after volume, and translate it till the end of his life. And now, after so many years, following in his footsteps, we continue translating his message in so many languages. I would now like to give you a glimpse at how the African BBT produces its books, what we've published so far, and what we're still working on. Of course, the BBT's primary goal is publishing Srila Prabhupada's books in all the languages of the world. And this goal is, no doubt, rather ambitious if we consider that Africa alone is host to some 2,000 languages. And as you may know, the African BBT is a relatively recent effort to serve the African people by providing spiritual knowledge through books, magazines, pamphlets, websites, lecture series, conferences like these, etc. And it dynamically continues to expand and develop its team and activities. To give you an idea of how our book production is organized, I'm showing you the following flowchart. What you see here is a chart we've put together some years ago, and although we do not always strictly stick to it in all detail, it does function as a map or an ideal. And these are the 4 strands of our production: text, design and layout, marketing, and management and production. And as you've seen in the slide of the entire flowchart, each strand has assigned to it a range of more specialized tasks. For this brief presentation it would simply take too long to elaborate upon all tasks of all strands, but here I'd like to point out that during the production of a title, the activities of each strand take place both in parallel to all others and at times converge, as often happens in the case of design and marketing, editing and design, and, of course, production management throughout. So since 2011, BBT Africa has produced 20 titles in 10 languages, and I'll briefly take you through a slideshow of the covers of the titles per year. 4 titles in 2011, and 2012, two titles in 2013, our first book in Afrikaans in 2014, reprints of English books in 2015, and 2015 also saw the printing of the introduction to Bhagavad Gita in Amharic, the first book in Amharic we've published, and another Amharic book in 2016, and finally the books we're launching in 2017, the Transcendental Teaching of Prahlad Maharaj in Amharic and the introduction to Bhagavad Gita in Lingala. BBT Africa has also published devotional books other than Srila Prabhupada's, such as the Handbook of Vaishnava Songs and Practices. And we're currently working on Matchless Mystic, Sri Narada and the Science of Bhakti Yoga. So currently we have the following titles in various phases of production. More Amharic titles, Afrikaans, 2 books in Chichewa, a new English title, the one I mentioned before, a complete Bhagavad Gita as it is in Lingala, and 10 titles in Soto for which we need editors, and finally Swahili and next Kosa. So these are some of the projects we're working on right now, and we're enthusiastic to increase our production more and more. But to do this, the BBT needs translators, editors, designers, and many others who would like to follow in Srila Prabhupada's footsteps, who would like to deeply connect themselves with the teachings and examples of the spiritual masters and acharyas of old, and see through their eyes and hear with their ears. So if you'd like to help us in this effort, kindly contact me at rupa.sanatana.jas@gmail.com. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.